Okay, welcome everyone to In This Together series from GTAC. And today we are doing cybersecurity tips for leading a remote workforce. And very grateful to have two industry leaders here today. We have Eldon Sprickerhoff, founder of eCentire, Chief Innovation Officer, and very early pioneer and inventor of what is now called a managed detection and response, which MDR. And we're really privileged because I heard him on another webinar yesterday, and the amount of knowledge this gentleman has is amazing. Over 20 years of tactical experience, and he's acknowledged in the cyber world as an subject matter expert in terms of information security analysis and global business. I believe he occupies the Blackberry building in Kitchener-Waterloo, a ton of expertise. And so very, very grateful to have Eldon on today. And then we have my very old good friend, known her for years from contact center space, and partner at Security Culture Institute, Catherine Thompson. Many of you have heard her before, and you have seen her migrate from the contact center over into the cyberspace. She's one of Canada's most passionate and influential voices surrounding the issues and opportunities related to cybersecurity in Canada. She speaks up. She is looking out for all of us when she goes to do government meetings, and she's in the know, pretty much. Like, she's in the know. And she's determined to help Canadians understand the risk and rewards associated with the digital economy. She's a co-founder of Security Culture Institute, and the chair of the Canadian Cybersecurity Innovation Institute. She's regularly called on to speak, just as Eldon. They both do webinars and live conferences whenever they start back up again, but they've done many in the past. And I look forward to you learning from them all. And so in the session today, and don't mind me, my camera's not on, so you're not missing a picture. The voice is coming through. You have Mike, Eldon, and Catherine. And they're going to address industry challenges. There'll be lots of opportunities for Q&A, and I can ask the questions in, and I'd be happy to field them over to them. We have Mike Aoki on the line, and he's going to help moderate the entire session, and he is just awesome at that. And then we'll talk about upcoming events. So the purpose behind these webinars, there's me and Mike. So really, we want to just share best practices across many subjects, answer your questions, connect, grow, and learn together, and support each other as we all navigate through this crisis. So we just try and bring in experts from various fields. And just a little housekeeping before we start. There's opportunities to ask a question. You can use the chat bar or the question bar, and you can also raise your hand. So you'll see the little hand icon. You can raise your hand, and I will do my best to get to you and get your question over to our speakers. And you'll also see there are two handouts that our speakers have been gracious enough to give, one from Eldon from his company eCentire, and there's one from Catherine Thompson, and you're welcome to download them, and we'll also have them on our website after. And now I will turn it over to Mike Aoki.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sangeeta. Appreciate that. And what we're going to do right now, just to go and start, is to find a bit more about what your opinions are. So I'm going to launch a poll here, which you'll see on the screen. And what I'd like you to do is to actually vote. So you can use your mouse to go and click off in terms of which one of these responses you would agree with most. And again, the poll question is, does your organization have a very clearly outlined, explained, and documented security policy relating to remote working? So now take your mouse and actually click on one of those three answers. And we'll actually share those poll results in just a moment. And about half of you responded now. So I'll give another 10 seconds or so the rest of you can respond on that. And just click one of those three answers in terms of your company's remote working policies. And we'll share the results in just a moment. Okay, so 3/4 of you have voted now, and I'll just give it another maybe 5 seconds, and then we'll share the results. All right, so let's share the results of the poll. And so you can see the results here on the screen. We've got 69% of you said yes, and we follow it, which is always good. 8% said yes, but we do not follow it. And 23% said no, they don't have one, a policy like that at all. And I just want to turn things over to Eldon and Catherine to actually give their comments on that survey. So Eldon or Catherine, whichever wants to go first, you can comment about that survey.
Eldon, do you want to start that off? Because you've probably been having these discussions on a daily basis with clients.
Sure. So, I'm happy to see that there was 69%. I'll start off with that. That's very good. I think if we'd done it this poll 5 years ago, we were seeing quite a different situation. I think I would guess that a lot of it has to do with PCI compliance and when they're doing investigations as to what you have in place. So as for everyone else, I thank you for being honest and open on this, and it shows that there's still some ways to go to get to a place where we're better secured in these unusual, I call them basically a living disaster recovery business continuity situation.
And I'd agree. I think that's better than expected. So kudos to the organizations that have it in place. And I agree with you, Eldon, probably we didn't have this 5 years ago. I think the only gap we're seeing or hearing right now from companies related to remote working policy is it didn't really cover the magnitude of those that would be going remote. So it didn't, there's a remote working policy, but when you take the whole organization and you put them in that situation, I don't think some of the IT policies and other things were in place to actually manage that magnitude of people that are going to be working remotely. But that's great to hear that organizations have policies in place and that the team is following it, because that's mission critical in terms of security and maintaining security during a very uncertain time.
Okay, good. Oh, excellent, Catherine. And Catherine, in terms of looking at securing remote workers, I know there's some information you wanted to share as well. So just take a look at the screen and cover that off.
Is this related to the some of the figures that we have here? Yeah. Okay.
It is actually, yes.
Yeah. So just to give some folks some context, and I wanted to start off really quickly by, again, commending Sangeeta, yourself, Mike, and all of the GTAC leadership team for coming together very quickly to put together this series. I've been on a couple of the presentations, and they've been fantastic. And again, it's wonderful to see yet again that, the GTAC community can come together during this time to support, to share information and actually, learn from each other, because it is very uncertain times. When Sangeeta came to me a couple of weeks ago around this topic, we were just at the beginnings of COVID-19 and pandemic response. A lot of organizations were just in, days kind of into that social distancing, quarantine. The transition to home in a lot of cases was swift and unexpected for some. It created a number of challenges for leaders from if we focus in on the security and IT teams within organizations, it was I wouldn't say it was in some cases pandemonium, but at the very least it was very difficult, because they had to scramble to ensure that not only they had scale on the network to support remote workers, and the remote workers had all the tools they could do to continue to do their job, but they had to do it in a secure way. So, unfortunately, during times like this, it opens a very wide door for cyber criminals that are kind of intent on kind of exploiting those networks. Now let's fast forward to today, and we're now starting to see some of that, the results and the statistics that are coming in to tell us what's exactly happening. Last week, the FBI came out and indicated that the number of reported cyber exploits had quadrupled. We had some very high-profile cyber attacks, including the World Health Organization, the U.S. The Department of Human and Health Services was also exploited. Checkpoint, which is one of the world's largest cybersecurity software company, did a global survey of 411 IT leaders, and they looked at everything from what's the landscape look like right now? What are they dealing with? Phishing attacks were up by 55%. The use of malicious websites, 32%, malware, 28%, ransomware, 19%. A very clear indication without any doubt that this pandemic certainly wasn't limiting, cyber criminals' interest or ability to actually exploit. If you drill down further in the survey, they looked at the remote worker perspective, and 95% of the respondents were indicating that they were facing added security issues, that they were in challenges that were having to deal with. 61% of those folks said that one of their concerns was that the organization wasn't ready and able to respond to such a drastic transition to remote working. So these are kind of the current landscape of what we're seeing in terms of securing operations as we work remotely and socially distanced. When Sangeeta asked me who would be best placed to kind of explain motives and tools used by cyber attackers, the impact of cybercrime, and what organizations should be looking for or looking at, I immediately thought of this handsome gentleman on the screen here. And I have, as Sangeeta said, I, among a lot of other people, have been a longstanding fan of eSentire. They're a proudly Canadian company, which is great to see. But they're also recognized as a global leader in security operations and very, very well regarded. From the perspective of Eldon, I've had the ability to travel with Eldon, attend meetings with Eldon. And one thing that he has is an incredible knack for taking what seems very complex and very detailed and make it very understandable and applicable to all of us. So I am very happy we're able to get him for today. So I'm going to hand over the mic to you, Mr. E.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that intro, and I hope not to disappoint after that kind of build up. I started eSentire just under 19 years ago, and things have changed quite a bit since then. And I think when you look from a crime perspective, we have this triplet of means, motive, and opportunity. And if you tried to start up a malware campaign 10 plus years ago, you had to be in a completely different place. You had to pretty much roll your own. And by that, I mean you'd have to understand how to program in, to attack operating systems. Usually, so you'd have to have a good idea of Windows internals. You'd have to have a list of people's emails and be able to, build this kind of malicious code and test it, and then send out these campaigns. And that, that required a certain amount of, knowledge that is simply not needed right now. You can, if you went back sort of 5 years and when ransomware really started taking hold, the people who originally wrote out the ransomware discovered they could make more money if they built up services to support that. So now you can go online, and for sort of the equivalent of $50 to $100 a month, they will roll you your own kind of ransomware, malicious content, and they will, there are service desks that are set up to help, whether it's to test, so you roll your own custom malicious code. They will distribute it for you. They will set up, help the the people that the victims set up Bitcoin wallets. And all of this is from a customer service perspective. So you don't need to have a degree in computer science to build this code. Someone will do it for you. And for the vast, so there's easy access to this kind of malicious weaponry. There's such high motivation. Most of the time, or a good part of the time, these criminals, they operate with impunity above the law. They're operating in domiciles that don't have extradition, or that the law enforcement is in on it. And if you look at there are certain domiciles, in sort of part of Eastern Europe or parts of South America, where there are education skills are extremely high. They have great universities, but not great job prospects. So if you found yourself in this situation, where you had either say a PhD in computer science, and you had the choice, you could make a few euro driving a cab versus 6-7 digits a year, doing what you love to feed your family. This is it's an easy push to get towards that, especially when there's a very low chance that you'd ever be caught. So you put these three things together: the means, the motive, and the opportunity. We are where we are right now, which 6 trillion in estimated losses expected for 2020, and these figures came out before the COVID attack vector as well, and that makes things just even a bit more complicated. So Mike, go forward, please.
Okay, good. And the next question about this is, of course, how does it work? So what's the anatomy of a cybercrime?
Sure. So if you could click one more, please. So usually there's three main vectors by which attacks are initiated, and the first two come through email as well. So usually phishing, as to what we discussed earlier. Whether there's a link that goes to infectious content, or there's attachment that comes through email that lets someone is persuaded to click through, and that starts off the attack vector. The third would be something from an infected website, and that's either can be usually it's from a hijacked website or an ad network. So advertising, you're trying to raise money. Advertisers are trying to raise money. It's a broad market right now, so they're willing to take whatever dollar gets sent to them. So they may attackers will put up things on an ad network that has malicious content on it. The other piece is from we call them a watering hole. So if a website where a lot of people will go to, if that's not well defended, that they will put up malicious content. People will think they're getting something legitimate, and they'll end up downloading this code. So the next part that goes through is, basically they're trying to get access to a beachhead machine, and generally attackers don't necessarily care, what that machine is. The idea is once they get a beachhead, which is, full-time or long-lasting access to a system, that they can then pivot from that one machine laterally to spread to as many machines as they can, tens, hundreds, thousands. They're perfectly happy to do that, and so they can harvest credentials. They can gain access to machines, get that information. I talked about ransomware a little bit earlier. If you go back 5 years or so, ransomware was usually a one-off, where you had one machine got infected, they start encrypting immediately, and then they start to they encrypt the machine, and then they ask for $500 worth of Bitcoin to be deposited. The attacks that we see now from a ransomware perspective are quite a bit different. They like to get one machine that's attacked, and then quietly, instead of encrypting immediately, they start spreading to every single machine they can get access to. So they get that code ready to roll, and then say on a Friday night where it might be not as busy, they start encrypting every single machine, and they've made themselves into the backup cycle as well by this point. So this is the process by which the ransomware, the vector itself is the same, but they're using it on a completely different perspective, different basis, a corporate level rather than a single machine. And they're asking for things like millions of dollars worth of ransom at this point. And this is going on these, to this day, they're getting hit with this kind of attack. So this is what it looks like right now.
Okay, good. I guess we have a sample here, I guess, of what one of these looks like then from the cyber criminal.
Sure. So this was something that came out fairly early, it's like before the big lockdown piece. This came out of Sky News out of the UK, and they're going after healthcare workers here. So, and this is particularly inappropriate. There's criminal behavior, and this is which is never great, but this is quite a bit over the line. This is the attackers would prefer to go after targets that are less defended than others, and again they're trying to get squeeze a ransom out of them. And so in this case, we've got people that are on the front lines fighting this virus. And if you ever did any work within healthcare, you'll recognize that every hospital of any significant size is like a small city. Everything runs on schedules, and the data flows forever, right? And they don't close. This makes it difficult to do things like patching or backups or things like this. If you think of even a big hospital, there's rarely a failover site because it requires it is that entity that just sits by itself. And everything is connected. If you think about, how important things like test results are, appointments, everything runs on a single network, and it's easy to disrupt. They have trouble, keeping systems alive and up to date because they may have dozens of different systems that run in there. And this is an example of, someone trying to get that beachhead, start encrypting broadly and persuade them in their, while they're on the front line, literally life and death situation, to encourage them to get be part of that victim, victimized through the attack. The next slide is somewhat different, getting a little bit deeper. So there's a PDF that's generated, and people are can you connect into this? And this was a deep dig into the macro underneath. There's one that I've seen the last week that is not healthcare related, and what it was, it plays on people's fear, right? So the attacker's trying to get people to click, and fear is a great motivator. Well, the one that we saw last week was it was a faked email from the company's HR department out to individual users and asking for a one-on-one Zoom message. And that, that's a huge motivator, especially now when we're talking about layoffs and furlough. They want them to click to this link to connect to the Zoom meeting. It's not a Zoom meeting, it's some of this malicious code as well. So this is the kind of thing that they're adapting using COVID and the fear of layoffs and furlough to get into people's machines. And it's beyond the pale. So there's sort of 9 bullet points. I'm not going to go into this because we're going to make this presentation available. I think there's 3 big slides that we have for recommendations. This is the first one, and I recognize that not every company has been able to get ahead of it and offer their remote workers their own corporate laptop. And phone and things like this. And I think, as Catherine was saying earlier, a lot of people didn't expect to be fully working remote at any time. We've been into it for a few weeks, so many of the initial problems with IT have been somewhat ameliorated, or we're learning to live with this situation. The biggest things here is that it has to be appropriate, it has to be possible. I know that there are your employees that share living quarters, that don't have their own kind of internet piece. They may be working on their own home devices. These are sort of 9 pillars of things that is best case, best scenario. And I recognize that as you're moving forward, it's going to be, you try to get to this state, and you do the best you can given these unusual circumstances.
Okay, good. I'll just go to the next slide as well. So a few more things in terms of securing your network.
Yeah, and that's, I started looking at the, BYOD was bring your own device, and now it's, you're bringing your office home. And it's these things that you need to keep it in mind. And, part of the, if you had problems with any kind of facet of security before, so we look at things like, Microsoft doing their patches. So they release their patches every, it's Patch Tuesday. If you had problems securing and updating your patching within the office environment, you are going to have a lot more trouble now that everybody's remote. And every single endpoint that is working remote now has to deal with being bombarded by attacks. And so that's, I go to number 6, which is huge, which is that it used to be that you'd have corporate environment that could, with firewalls and so on, that could help lock down these things. Depending on how you're set up with remote access, you may not have that kind of defense. So you have to focus on the endpoint more than ever to as that last line of defense against the attacks, whether it's attachments or phishing attachments or links or watering holes attacks. And so that's the really the one big piece that if you're able to defend the endpoint, it's going to help you with an incident response perspective.
Okay, good. All right, great advice, Eldon. And we'll take a look at the next slide as well, which is again more about securing in terms of doing this.
Yeah, and so there's the two columns that I have here. There's sort of must do, again being the lower hanging fruit, and then the advanced pieces as well. And I recognize that not everyone can do this for different perspective, where you don't have wholly separate infrastructure. Not everybody has their own personal internet access, so they can't do even many of the things that are on the left. If you're in an apartment building, maybe you're using the apartment Wi-Fi as well. So these are the things you should be striving for. But it's not it's not the end of the world if you're not physically able to do this. And this is considered the best possible scenarios to keep yourself safe.
Okay, good. All right, excellent. And the next slide we have on here is some common questions as well. So let's turn things over to Sangeeta if you want to field some of the questions that the attendees have for Eldon and for Catherine.
Okay, Mike. So I had one question that came in here. So it's from Robert Wainwright, and he's saying, what are your suggestions for remote workers that may require PCI and/or GDPR compliance?
So it's yours, Eldon.
Catherine?
Yep.
No, that's Eldon's.
So I was a few years back, I was a PCI QSA, and so it's I've let that lapse, but I'm still I still remember what it took. I think the biggest thing that you've got here from the PCI perspective is you want to lock down your CDE as well as possible, and so much of that means how do you restrict people from gaining and accessing those systems. And that's right at the core of your business, and it does dovetail into your GDPR piece as well. So it's going to be, it can be difficult. And again, the onus is on the ID department and the security department as well to say, we need to let people do their work, but we can't let data move out of the environment. And if you go through the PCI standards, there's where they're talking about multi-factor authentication, strong password policy, up-to-date patches, anti-malware. And so a lot of this again focuses on the endpoint, like I said earlier, where you, if you're able to install and make sure that applications which are installed are only the ones that you're supposed to have for your environment. We're talking about working from home. try to keep your home separate from your work as well. And that's, that requires a certain level of, restriction where if you are able to let the end user have their remote machine that is a corporate machine, you can restrict things. If you're not prepared for that, it's a little more difficult to be able to exert that kind of control. That's definitely needed to maintain PCI compliance, and don't run afoul of GDPR. There's questions with respect to VPN. A lot of this has to do, there's split VPNs where, whether or not you allow all that traffic to tunnel directly into the corporate environment or not. These are things that aren't easily addressed outside of an IT and security perspective. There's cases like, disabling remote access after a certain amount of time, so you don't have things that are left idle. And like I said, they keep banging on the fact is like you limit access to the cardholder data environment only to individuals that require that kind of access. And these are, again, some pretty big pillars, but these are the things that when you go through the PCI audit that they're going to be asking for you. So yeah. It's, the other side being, on an incident response perspective, how have you had to change your incident response planning given this new environment?
And that doesn't even include PIPEDA, which is relevant to Canadian companies now. And you've got, for those who aren't familiar with PIPEDA, it's the Personal Information Protection, Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. And now with the changes that came to PIPEDA back in November of 2018, you've got mandatory disclosure on breaches up to within a certain period of time. So you have to notify the officer of the privacy commissioner now. You're required in some cases, at least the private sector, you're required to notify any customers that have been impacted by it. And there's fines anywhere from up to $150,000 per offense. And unlike GDPR, which is based on gross revenue of your company, they're kind of, with PIPED, it's standard across the board. So, you're a large entity like, I don't know, Canadian Tire, and you get $150,000 fine. It's a hit to your brand, and you certainly, it's a significant fine. But if you're a small to medium-sized enterprise and you get hit with that $150 fine, you're in serious trouble. So there's that on top of it, although we still have a little bit of a gap in terms of awareness amongst maybe less mature companies as to what those fines and what that legislation looks like.
Great, thank you.
Okay, good, thanks, Nikita. Are there any other questions from the audience right now for Eldon and Catherine?
That is it. Oh, no, here's another one from Robert. You mentioned bring your own device. Are you suggesting installing device management software, MDM, on personal devices?
If you're requiring the end user to access cardholder data, I think you're going to have to mandate that. And I think that goes along with your BYOD. You're looking, and there's other ways. There's many ways to do this. Whether it's separate containers, but it's simply not safe to run consolidated workload without having some kind of separation of work from home.
Good advice, Eldon. Appreciate that as well. Just one other question too, and actually, Catherine, I'll get this one towards you. I know, Eldon, you talked quite a bit about the hardware and software components in terms of looking at cybersecurity. Catherine, are there any other things that, we have a lot of contact center leaders in the line right now, directors, managers, that they should be telling their staff as far as what the agents are doing as far as social engineering attacks and threats in that way? Because now they're working from home, possibly writing down account numbers and pieces of paper their kids can see, etc. What are some just easy tips that contact center managers could tell their staff about having to secure information as well, Catherine?
Well, and that's a really good point, because the one thing, and I think it was kind of some of those things are covered on Mike on the next slide, which looks The first thing to understand and we'll discuss this kind of from a people's perspective and really zero in on the contact center agent is, first of all, the magnitude of change that comes with this work style, especially for contact center agents that have been working up until a couple of weeks ago in a robust contact center environment. So you take them out of that environment that has lots of resources and the ability to answer questions or garner support, which is right within the walls and sometimes just a couple of steps away from them, to a somewhat isolated environment. And in many cases, it could be working in a home office, but as you referenced earlier, for some people, it's a kitchen table, or even in some more extreme cases, and with folks that, agents that are living in an environment where they're not the only person, or they share an apartment or a house or that, they might be sitting on a bed doing their job. So the magnitude of the cultural shift for them is pretty jarring. So that's kind of the first thing we talk about with leaders, is understand the adjustment. The second thing is, you know, and I heard this kind of referenced, well, you know, they're just working in an at-home agent environment. That's not necessarily the case here, especially in what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. You know, when at-home agents deployments started happening, you know, 10 years ago, and I'm kind of dating myself here, you know, my clients at the time were RBC and Scotiabank, and there was hours upon hours of consideration put into it. There was personality testing to make sure that the agent had the personality qualities and traits that would help them be able to adjust and thrive in an at-home work environment. You had internal audit teams that would go out and visit that home office environment to ensure that it had a door with a lock. In some cases, you know, a paper shredder. That's kind of, again, dating ourselves in terms of the magnitude of security. But things have really changed now. So, and in this case, when you're sending, as we kind of referenced earlier, sometimes people are being sent home and they're not being, either having to use their own personal laptop and that type of thing. It's not the same, excuse me, it's not the same environment, nor can you manage in the same way as you might do with an at-home agent. The third thing, and this really drills down on culture, and it's something that we really see emerging, is that as we become a digital economy, and there's no doubt that we have embraced it in many ways, shapes, and forms, the security becomes a job for all of us. It's not, you know, we still see, despite all of the, you know, security training that takes place on the job, there's still a perception that either an individual or a team or some department and technology is overarching responsible for security. But yet, year after year after year, we see data that shows that the #1 cause of data breach is human error. So we spend and invest a lot of time and effort in locking down our facilities and physical security and security of the infrastructure, but we kind of really haven't spent enough time building that, what we call kind of the human firewall. So it's starting to reinforce that message to agents. Yes, we're working remotely, but you need to understand the importance of security. And Mike, as you said, like quick tips. You might not have you know, what kind of environment are you working in? Is there other people around who could hear information or have access to the information that you're writing down? IoT devices, believe it or not, baby monitors are a big favorite of hackers. Even, you know, Alexa or your refrigerator might have IoT ability. Those things in that case should be considered in terms of the environment that you're working in. But one of the most important things, like we say, from a leadership perspective, is really having those discussions ongoing, as in daily, as to what are the things that you should be considering or be looking out for in the carrying out of your responsibilities and duties, that will give you a little more understanding in terms of if something doesn't look right or feel right, you should be empowered, or the agent should be empowered to have someone to go to look into this for them. Because again, they're in a remote environment. They're not going to have that ability to tap someone on the shoulder, but there still has to be a mechanism for addressing those kind of inconsistencies or insecurities they might have.
Okay, good, Catherine. That's great advice. I like that as well. And I know, Ellen, you want to talk a little bit in terms of looking at PCI compliance when it comes to things like credit cards as well. So how can they secure that?
Yeah, it continues on with what I was saying a little bit earlier, where there's some 9 or 10 different pillars as to what you should do to what you knew you had to do before to secure your CDE, and you can bet that if you're large enough to have a review, an audit performed, whether it's on site or remote. I don't think they've said exactly how they're going to pursue these. They're going to ask, they're going to specify, specifically ask, what did you do during a remote access period to maintain the integrity and the security of your cardholder data environment? And even more than ever, they're going to ask again, multi-factor authentication, and they'll ask about what you did on the endpoint to secure those the data and to help your staff maintain the security of the data. They're going to look again, that's part of a larger access control question. They focus on encryption of communications end to end. There again, and that will focus quite a bit on remote access. There's no doubt they'll be understanding as to what you need to do to do your job. But they'll be asking questions, like as Catherine was mentioning, how did you maintain the weakest link, where I said that it's pretty tough to patch people, and so what you have to do is on a regular basis inoculate them with skepticism, because they are your last defense. And these are things that will come up if you come through an audit in the coming year. So tech can do a lot of the heavy lifting, but there's still so much, most of the PCI revolves around process and adherence to process. You'll have to prove this is what you did to defend everything from the endpoint in the people through to your CDE and maintain the integrity of that complete system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. All right, excellent. And so looking at this too, how are you able to go ensure the agents working from home, working remotely, are keeping all the information secure? Catherine, do you want to address this one?
Well, I'll address the kind of the first bullet that looks at security awareness and social media, and I'm really zeroing in on social media, because one of the trends we're seeing during this pandemic is the kind of explosion in the use of social media. And again, we're seeing people using it as a way to bridge the gap with their family, with their friends, and with coworkers. And again, I think it's great, and I think it's important. But posting pictures of baked goods and digress. I don't know what the real obsession is with everybody baking bread lately, but everywhere from football players to Pink are posting up pictures of bread. Or board games, or teaching your dog how to fetch a beer while you're watching television. All that stuff is really cute. What is concerning right now, but very advantageous for the cyber criminal, is the amount of pictures that folks are taking of their newly found remote working environment. Okay, I attended a session last week where they showed pictures that they literally scooped off Facebook, Instagram, off web, of folks that were doing everything from showing their work environment, but clear pictures of their computer screens. One particular one, you could see all the company information and client information. There was even a picture of one who had all the picture of his or her computer screen, and beside them, I kid you not, was their mobile phone and they had their banking app open. So all the banking app information was there. So the one thing that we should be doing as leaders is, again, well, we want to create and encourage that community during this work style that we're adjusting to, is to have an understanding that social media is good, but we have to be cognizant of what we're sharing and with whom we're sharing it with. And that's an easy fix.
I think the other side it is that, we keep going back. It's not just the tech side, right? There's so much on the soft skills, things that you may not have thought about being a vector of attack. So, if you see people with, Zoom screens open for social media, here I am with my work pals using Zoom. As if you're broadly open to, the outside world, I can say, okay, now I know that you use Zoom, and I'm going to, within your corporate environment, for example, and I'm going to send that fake HR, request. This is your head of your HR department. I do that by going on LinkedIn to see who that is, and I send it to your work email. It says, we have an urgent call, in the next 20 minutes. I'm going to set this this request in, and odds are pretty good that you're going to get a good number of people that click it. And it's not just one of these 9 bullets, right? It's every single one of them. And it's not a question of having to be 10 out of 10 every single time, but you have to be able to justify that it's appropriate to the size of your organization, the sensitivity of the data that you're holding, and be able to understand where the, be able to understand where to put the most emphasis to defend your systems.
Yep.
Great, Alden, thank you for that. I know you got a bit of a cough, so it's okay. Now some water.
It's the case of speaking nonstop on Zoom calls for most of the day. So thank you for your understanding.
Yeah, exactly. I know you have that throat after the whole day, right? So you have your water. Okay. I don't know, Catherine, do you want to make a comment about this, or do you want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah, I think the next slide will kind of play in what we're talking about here.
All right. Perfect. Okay, so the question for you is that our agents are inundated with calls and just working remotely. What are a few easy practices to put in place to become more secure?
Well, I think the first one that always comes to mind from my perspective, and Alden talked about this earlier, is the adherence to the letter of policies and processes. Now, understand that the uncertainty of this environment, and look at it from the call center agent's perspective. They're working, in many cases, they've been transitioned to an environment that's foreign and new for them. So there's some uncertainty and anxiety that goes along with that. Then you heighten it with the anxiety and uncertainty of the customer base. So you have customers maybe that are phoning in. You could have longer than average wait and hold times. Customer is calling in and they're in a heightened state of anxiety. There is that natural desire, as we are human, as pleasers, and especially contact center agents that are very focused on ensuring that the customer has a satisfying experience and you address their concerns and they leave in a better state than maybe they came into the call. Well, for calls for the professional cyber criminal, whether it's social engineering on the phone or through online communication, this is an excellent time to test those policies and processes, because the agent may believe that, well, if I just skip this, I can get this resolved and this person will be happier. But we see again and again and again, year after year, in incidences where social engineering is put in play, where again, it's easy, the agent leaves a call thinking they've done something really important for the client, but in reality, they've actually helped accelerate that exploit or that cyber incident that the criminal wants to carry out. So again, just really strict adherence to policies and processes, and don't be afraid. Your agent shouldn't be afraid to explain to the customer that these mechanisms are put in place for the security of their personal information. So this is the type of the policies and processes that need to be in place for their own personal information protection. The second one, and this really speaks to leadership, is reinforcing the whole concept of secure and satisfied. And again, the contact center environment, especially GTACers, are extremely passionate about their clients and the customer experience and delivering a world-class experience for their customers, and that's fantastic. But we need to, at the same time as we're delivering that, we need to be making sure that it's secure. So you have your IT teams that will deal with the technology digital side, but agents should be aware and empowered through security awareness that they have a role to play in that. So they have to ensure they're doing both sides of the coin in any interaction with a customer. So secure on one side, satisfied on the other.
Okay, good,
And
excellent.
I think if I can jump in just for a sec, I think there's, like I said, it's a different scenario when you're working fully remote. And, I think things like, identifying users for IT support, that's a huge thing. Whereas, your IT teams that are also remote, they should be prepared to get calls from people pretending to be employees, and vice versa, where remote staff, should be, there should be a process in place so you can verify this person who says they're calling in from corporate IT is actually who they say they are before they provide information or access to their machines.
Okay, good, excellent. Great advice as well. And I know the next slide I've got some more information too. So in terms of looking at this, what are some 3 actual items to really increase security over the phone?
And we've kind of touched on this on the other channels, but again, we'll look at it from a leadership perspective, which is, following the kind of this mantra every day in terms of the interactions you have with your team members, which is reinforcing the need for these policies and authentication security policies to be kind of followed to the letter. Ensuring and giving, ensuring that there is that secure workspace. So having those discussions, and I'm sure most of the more mature organizations have had those, but just ensuring that on a day-to-day basis that, your team member is adhering to that. Because, well, I've decided I don't want to, work in the kitchen, I want a change of scenery, so I've moved downstairs to the basement. Okay, you move downstairs to the basement, then you go through the whole thing of, okay, who's in the environment that you're working in the basement. Most organizations have said, essentially pick a location and stick to it so that you can ensure that there's some security. And again, reinforcing that message with the team about the importance of security, whether it's, the daily tip, something that you want to be giving them, something that you've read, whatever the case is, but just in reinforcing the importance of ensuring that every interaction is secure. And if there's any questions, again, you're getting a link, the employee receives a link, they're not quite sure if they should be clicking on it. There should be that reinforcement that if you're not sure you should be clicking on it, don't. Reach out to somebody within the organization to ask those questions. They need to be empowered to believe that they have the ability to do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Catherine. I appreciate that for phone security. And I have a question for you in terms of email and chat security. So what can they do there to help protect that?
If I'm going to put it down to 3, I think we said here, so endpoint security, which really, it is the last piece of defense. And, so I reiterate, sort of, maintain your regular patching. Patch Tuesday came out 2 Tuesdays ago. There's going to be a process for testing patches and getting that rolled out, even in this unusual, remote. Everybody is their own remote office now. Restrict access to who uses the laptop or computer. Have personal firewalls or enabled. Endpoint software. So something like Carbon Black or CrowdStrike that helps to defend against attackers as best as possible. That's sort of that next generation antivirus piece. And it's like professional tooling, not sort of freebie antivirus, right? The well-known freebie antivirus, they're not up to the task of defending against these attacks these days. That's my first piece. So the second one was be able to segregate, we're working from home, separate as possible work from home. If they're corporate laptops that are available, restrict what can be done on those things. Don't let people that shouldn't have corporate access to those things as well. Yep. And the third one was, sort of lock down the usage. Again, 2-factor authentication, VPN access, and to, restrict unnecessary programs that should not be running on those things. So those are the 3 big, 1, 2, 3 punch that I'd say to defend over the chat and email and web conferencing.
Okay, good. All right, excellent. And what about securing the video conferencing piece, especially Zoom, which has been in the media a lot lately? So Eldon, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, So, Zoom got a lot of bad press, and it's not completely unwarranted at that as well. So, I've spoken a lot in the last 2 weeks about what Zoom has been doing. If you think with at the beginning of March, they were running about 10 million calls a day. 2 weeks in, they were doing 200 million calls a day. So, it is incredibly easy to use, and I think especially in the last 3 weeks, they've done an incredible job of tightening up things that we're seeing quite legitimately as gaps in security. But then there's a lot of other pieces that if they've gone for default of passwords. If you give everybody a key, you shouldn't be surprised a lot of people want to open that door. So they've done a lot of updates. And I maintain that there's no non-trivial piece of software that is completely bug-free, that it just does not exist. I think they've done a really good job of restricting, locking down the problems they've seen. Like two Saturdays ago, they implemented sort of an application level firewall, which will restrict where data flows. So you could say, I don't do any data, I don't do any work in APAC. They can restrict Zoom traffic that might traverse by accident or by default through these different geographic zones. And the biggest thing is to keep things up to date. What was funny is last week, Microsoft Teams quietly announced that they had a similar vulnerability in Microsoft Teams that they very quickly and quietly patched. But again, no software is bug-free, and that's just keep things up to date. Take advantage of the new features that they have in place, and it is very highly secured when you want to be. I think the FSISAC, which is the Financial Center Systems Information Access and Sharing Center, uses Zoom, and they're the ones that do anonymized distribution of attack information across every tier 1 bank in the world.
Yep.
Okay, good, excellent. I know you've got some other online resources as well to share. So Catherine or Elvis, just want to mention what those are briefly.
Well, the first is I encourage everybody to take a look at Easton Tire's crisis resource page. They have put together, Eldon, you've got resources, white papers, those types of things that are downloaded onto it. So I went through it. It is very rich, very detailed. So have a look at that. You also have some resources, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, cyber.gc.ca, along with the UK government, the NCASC and the US CERT. All of these bodies are putting up recommendations, notifications, those types of things. So they're very rich in information, and make sure to check those out. But I also encourage anybody who has any questions related to security and compliance from that perspective to reach out, to Eldon or the team at Easton Tire from that perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you.
For that 29% that don't have security policy, we actually have a security policy framework and incident response playbooks that are freely available for use on our website.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks, Alvin, for pointing that out. Catherine as well, thanks for your information too. And I want to turn things over to Sangeeta right now, just to wrap up today's webinar. So Sangeeta.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for being so timely, Mike, and keeping everything moving. Awesome, Alvin and Catherine, just fantastic information. So we have another webinar, and I just noticed I made a typo. It's on May 15th, not on May 1st. Today's May 1st. So May 15th, and registration is open. We have a fantastic webinar being planned right now because, okay, everybody worked really, really hard, got their agents home safely. Now what? And we have Anne-Marie Greer from TSC. We have Bruce Simpson from Switchgear and Mark Rodrigue from Contact Point 360. All have previous leadership experience working with remote teams. So they'll bring everything from pre-COVID over to help everyone who is experiencing getting people over to a home now just because of COVID. So they have years and years of experience. Registration is open. It's on May 15th. That is my typo. Thank you for fixing that, Mike. And registration is open. The link will be sent in the follow-up email with this recording. So definitely take advantage of that. And I just wanted to promote an organization that I think is amazing. It is musicals. It's Unsung Heroes, produced by GTAC influencer Neil Dillon. And every year they put on musicals and they support wonderful charities. And he's a couple pillar charities that he's done fantastic work for. These musicals are wonderful. This year will be virtual, and the funds will go to support Camp Ooch, which is for children suffering from cancer. And you know, everyone's under stress because of COVID, but charities are really, really hit hard. And it's so sad when it's children that are already compromised, already suffering. So you could support this in many ways through either sponsoring or do a team event. You could participate as singers or participate by buying tickets to attend. And, you know, it's just a worthy cause. And I just really want to take this opportunity to promote it. And I'm going to ask, well, I'll send the link out also with this follow-up email, because it's just a wonderful thing to support. And it's a wonderful team building event as well. So we do have more questions, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I know you have competing demands on everything. So Eldon and Catherine have been gracious enough to stay on for a few more minutes because I have a couple more questions. So we're officially over the webinar for those of you who have to go. And I appreciate your time and hope you can register for the May 15th webinar. So that being said, Catherine and Eldon. So here's another question. How are you auditing your agents to ensure compliance?
Do you want to take it from the security perspective, Eldon? I can talk about the people side of it.
Yeah, so I think, again, so much of it will have to do with what you've provided them, right? So, if you have, corporate laptop, for example, we should be able to, connect in and look for unusual behavior. And that's, it gets, if you're relying on them to use their own personal machines, their own devices, and you don't have that kind of insight or view into what they're doing, I think you're going to find it very difficult to do any kind of audit whatsoever. You need to be tooled to do that kind of analysis if you need to do spot audits.
One of the things that we're seeing right now is a response to this, because there's uncertainty as to, even with the reopening up of Ontario, for example, it's a staged approach, and you may not have everybody going back into the environment, the contact center, all at once. It might be a graduated kind of approach. One of the things that, again, the ability to use that virtual platform is to actually test and I would encourage, in any cases that you can, is to revisit the training, but do it in a virtualized way. So, even an existing, training platform that tests them on phishing and what malware is and what phishing looks like, tactics of social engineering. You may be doing that for the organizations that did it kind of in a classroom environment and in a person-to-person environment. Transitioning that to remote working, or transitioning to virtualized platform, building in some of the remote working realities, but continuously kind of training them if you can. And I think it can be, there's platforms, even the one that we put together is very relatively easy and straightforward in terms of the explanation, but it also has a component to auditing them. So you're actually seeing what information they're getting and how they're applying it to their day-to-day responsibilities and auditing them on that. So that's another way to approach it. And I think, you know, if you look at what we're going to learn from the pandemic, and it'll be a number of different things, I think remote work style will be something that could be plausible in the future again, and it's that ability to have those people armed with that knowledge to be able to address some of those security aspects up front.
So, and actually, I'd like to add one other thing I thought about while Catherine was speaking. You know, we at Eastern Tire, we have a security operations center. So we have, you know, I think just under 130 people running 24/7, and we are in, you know, across multiple domiciles. We have an operations center in Waterloo, an operations center in Cork, Ireland, and you know, we built our back end to be in the cloud, and we're able to do analysis on our analysts as well. So, but we had that done in place before, and so, you know, again, if you don't have that kind of instrumentation that's available beforehand, you're going to find it very difficult to do it, you know, ad hoc, and to see, you know, we're able to tell you how our analysts have been able to handle working from home, everyone working from home, instead of people being able to reach out people side by side. And so, like I said, it's when we do get on the other side of this, that kind of instrumentation is going to be very helpful, and it will help you make decisions as to, you know, who are people that need some help in a performance perspective, and you know who are having more difficulty working from home and before and afterwards. But you know, without that instrumentation, it's you going by gut feel, and if you don't have numbers, all you have is an opinion.
Okay, I have one more question and then we'll wrap up. So should you include partnering with IT and HR on new and frequent agent training on security?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
How you feel?
Yeah, so, you know, part of the, you know, I'm pure techie background, you know, and you know, what I've found is that, you know, again, I think I said earlier, when you have technical problems, it's easy to have a technical fix. This is not a purely technical problem. So you have to use people who, again, using those oft-vaunted, you know, soft skills to figure out what works best to get the message driven home.
Yep. And if you look at insider threat, we always say with insider threat, that's not just it's a technology issue. Well, it's a risk, but it's a people issue. So, you know, HR should be a part of that process of understanding, you know, not always the threat is outside of the organization. Sometimes it lies within. So, you know, cyber isn't just technology, cybersecurity and cyber risk isn't just a technology issue. It's an overarching issue for an organization. It's also a great opportunity, but it does involve, to some extent, a transition or a baking in of security into the overall culture of an organization. I think it's went from a nice to have to a need to have.
Wonderful.
And I think the other piece that I say is, you know, we're all under heightened stress right now, and you know, you need soft skills and that approach more than ever.
Absolutely.
That's great. So that's it for questions. And it's so nice to see so many people staying on past the 3 o'clock stop time, because I know everyone is swamped and bombarded. So thank you again, Catherine Thompson, Eldon Sprickerhoff, Mike Aoki. Great teamwork, and thank you for serving our community. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Have a
Time.
great weekend.
Stay safe.
Okay, thanks, Sangeeta. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.